Welcome everyone to yet another History Fellas podcast episode. Today we're going to be continuing our discussion about the Eastern Front and other sort of Russian-related topics. We are a little bit short-staffed today. Our good friend the B-Man was...
But yeah, so as he said, today we're going to be talking about the Eastern Front, and you might be like, well, you haven't posted in a month. And it's like, first of all, shut up. Second of all,
our podcast.
STFU. Not you, but the audience.
Exactly.
They suck.
Exactly.
But basically, first of all, it's kind of been, cramming because it was like the end of the year, exams, Rhythm just left. All right. But all of that kind of stuff. Just life happened, and we can't always do the podcast always. So basically, sorry if you were waiting. I don't think anyone was, but still, here it is now, I guess. Better late than never. And we're going to be, now that the summer is starting again, we're probably going to be doing way more and probably going to be doing it consistently, way more consistently, if not every Saturday. So, I guess stuff to look forward to if you like this horrible abomination of
exactly. What do you mean horrible
podcast.
Abomination? You mean the funniest
it's pretty
podcast
bad.
Of all time?
Oh yeah, the greatest podcast.
Excuse me, brother. All right, so yes. Anyway, we left off last time on a siege of what? What was it? Leningrad, right?
I believe so. Let me see here. I believe it was after Stalingrad.
All right.
Where we left off, and I think we were setting the stage for Kursk. So we could go into
Kursk.
Yeah. So if you don't remember, we'll just give you a quick recap. We were talking about the Eastern Front, and if you don't know much about that, basically it was the biggest theater of war ever. Tons of casualties. Stalingrad, more than 1 million casualties just in one battle. Admittedly, it was a long and really big battle, but still, that's very impressive. But basically, we just went over Operation Barbarossa, otherwise known as Operation Otto.
Yes.
We basically just discussed what was happening. We discussed the strategies, the supply line, all the logistics. Not too in depth because it was already for 45 minutes. So we didn't want to bore people probably more than we're already doing.
More boring than we already are.
Yeah. So basically I think that's where we left off. I'll link the video down below because it's kind of long, but I think it's worth it because it kind of gives some more in-depth knowledge than what is normally given. And not trying to pat myself on the back here, but it was decent. All right, it was a decent amount of knowledge. But yeah, so basically, yeah. So Kursk, just some quick facts. It was the biggest tank battle in all of history.
Second biggest, actually.
Second, what was the first biggest?
I'm not sure. I can't remember. Nor do I care.
I want to actually look this up. I gotta consult the Oracle.
This, brother. Yes, we're very professional. I know.
Yeah. We don't even have any notes or anything.
Only the highest of knowledge around here.
Yeah. But yeah, basically all of our knowledge is basically based off of 20-minute YouTube videos and Wikipedia. While we weren't paying attention in class, basically.
The most reliable source of fucking.
Yeah, you probably shouldn't consult us. If you're trying to cram for a history exam, don't.
You should.
You
should. We are the smartest. We are certified historians.
You're gonna
get History Channel.
You're gonna get. Yeah, the History Channel is what. That's very intellectual.
Yes, we're college-grade historians.
Yeah. Yeah, see, I looked up biggest tank battle. It said the Battle of Kursk was large. Let me actually look at the stats here. Involving some 6,000 tanks, 2 million troops, and 4,000 aircraft. All right, so that's pretty much it. Yeah, it's kind of embarrassing that I had to Google that on the podcast, but whatever. Let's continue. But it was the decisive turning point, if not Stalingrad, because it's kind of contested. What is the turning point? People kind of contest whether it was some people even like to say that the turning point was all the way back at the end of Operation Barbarossa with the defeat of Moscow, like with the defeat at Moscow. But I disagree, and I kind of disagree with Stalingrad as well, because it
Kursk
was
is most definitely the definitive turning point, though.
yeah. And some people, and then some like Verabus who are like, "Oh my God, this Germany was so good." They
The
like
Germans
to put
could have won if they did X.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that later.
We discussed that yesterday, and we could also talk about it now. Not yesterday, the last episode, which was like a month ago.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, and some people who are, well, I guess Verabus like to say, "Oh yeah, the turning point was all the way back in 1944," and I've even heard some people say, "Oh yeah, the turning point was 1945 when they crossed the river," which is. I think most sane people can say.
I think that's beyond a turning point. That's just definitive defeat.
Yeah, that's like the final nail in the coffin.
We'll talk about the theory that if the Germans did X, they could have won, and how it's completely bullshit and bogus in a later episode.
It's pretty dumb.
So yes. Anyway, Kursk. The Germans see this big salient in the Russian front. They're like, well, that's not good. They can put a ton of men and tanks and planes and other sort of very scary things that also happen to shoot bullets in that salient. And it's what probably Soviet high command is going to be pushing through is what the Germans think. I mean, yeah, it's a massive bulge in their lines. It's extreme. It's in a very bad spot, and it's definitely a very vulnerable spot for the Germans.
Absolutely.
So they decide that the best possible way to eliminate the salient is to completely cut it off from the rest of the Russian lines. So they devise a sort of pincer attack movement to completely close out the salient from the Russian lines.
And encircle a ton of troops.
Exactly.
Like, similar, and then this is kind of a theme throughout the entire war, is they try to replicate, because, Operation Barbarossa was obviously very successful, and they tried to replicate the tactic they used, which was the fast encirclement with armor, doing a pincer movement, capturing massive swaths of prisoners, and basically.
If you ever played Horror 4, you know what we're talking about.
Yeah, I can't play that game anymore. It gives me clinical depression, and that's not even like a funny, edgy meme. Like, I cannot play that game. I don't want to get into it. All right,
we're very professional here, people.
Yes, very. This is like some InfoWars Alex Jones talk show level professional right here.
Exactly.
But so yeah, I mean, I guess it's kind of an apt comparison, but basically the German high command is kind of a mixed bag, right? Because they go from utter genius to like
real stupid.
Yeah, I guess that's the best way to say it. Really stupid. Like kind of like a they kind of range from like Robert E. Lee levels of military genius to like 4-year-old on the spectrum playing with toy soldiers kind of thing. So it's a mixed bag is the point.
If you two are a tactics connoisseur, you would know.
Okay. But yeah, basically, yeah. So it's a kind of mixed bag, and they were kind of what I'd recommend. What I'd recommend. I forgot the name. I finished this book a while ago. I mean, not a while ago. I think a few weeks ago. It was it was a book about the German high command. I'm trying to remember the name.
Just Google book about the German high command. You'll find it somewhere.
Yeah. I think it was Shattered Genius. I think it was. Oh, it's him.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, it appears B-Man has not been assassinated, and he has come back from the dead.
He rose from the grave to be Calsat, so to speak.
Oh my god.
It's okay. It's Alfred Weird Al Yankovic.
So
on this track. But what we were discussing, we were talking about the German high command, and we were talking about how Sometimes they were really good, sometimes they were really bad, just to catch you up. Talking about Kursk. So now that he's here, is here. I believe it was Shattered Genius. I believe the book was called.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's not. Fallen. It was some. You know what? Honestly, give me a second. Let me try to find a book.
Brother, are you just gonna SMH? B-man.
Yes.
What are you doing here?
Dunno. Wanted to join, so I joined. Not that difficult. Did you see my new status?
Yes, it's very funny.
So here it is. It is Shattered Genius by David Stone. I really recommend it. Pretty good. It's about the decline and fall of the German general staff in World War II. Pretty good book. I would recommend that wholly if you want to learn more about history and the topics we're discussing, more than just a surface level stuff we're doing. So continue on your spiel, Mr.
Your balls itch. So yes, the German High Command and others sort of. Oh wait, yeah, we're talking about the Kursk salient. So the German High Command comes up with this brilliant idea that they've never used before, which is to use a pincer attack, which is basically coming from two different sides of the enemy's flanks, to surround the salient and cut it off from the Russian forces. And unfortunately, as we talked about in the last video, this doesn't go to plan. Basically, British code breakers who have cracked the Enigma code at this point find out about the Germans' brilliant plan, which they have never used before. Yep. And they send it to Soviet High Command, and they have this brilliant plan, an actually brilliant plan, which involves very simple tactics which no one has ever used before.
And basically, they just do the same thing.
They fill the salient with anti-tank guns, tanks, men, everything. It's
kind of like some sort of
trench
variant
line
of a human and vehicle kind of wave tactic.
I don't know. It was some sort of like trench line or something. I don't know. It must have never been used before, like 30 years ago or 30 years before.
Yeah. But so continue on your spiel about the thing.
After the Russians decide to come up with this not so brilliant plan of turning the Kursk salient into a veritable fortress. And the Germans don't really know any better. They're at this point in the war, their sort of scouting facilities have been greatly decreased. They can't do a lot of reconnaissance, which is extremely important.
And the Luftwaffe was kind of crippled.
Not exactly destroyed at this point.
Well, I mean, it was definitely inhibited.
Yes.
By and I think the first nail in the coffin for the Luftwaffe was the Battle of Britain, but that's a topic for another day.
We'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
So the Germans don't really know any better. They know that the Russians that there's something going on in the Kursk salient, but they don't exactly know that the Russians know they're coming. And they decide even though that they have this gut feeling in that they still decide to go forward with this plan, and it does not go well. They at the Battle of Kursk, not only is it basically like the Germans just run into a brick wall and they can't move forward, they're almost completely destroyed.
It's and it's not like a brick wall you can punch through. It's like a brick wall with titanium backplating with a ton of mud in front of it. So it's
basically
also getting
shot at.
Yeah. So it's not a fun time to be. Well, I think the entire Eastern Front was not a fun time to be any kind of soldier. But especially now, it wasn't a fun time. And let me again consult the Google machine. Casualties at Kursk. Very professional, like. So yeah. So at the end of so the German forces had suffered 200,000 casualties, which keep in mind that's not all deaths. Some of it is missing in action and injuries, but that's still like a pretty big chunk of their forces. And they lost over 500 tanks, which is a lot. And Soviet losses were, even in typical Soviet fashion, were four
Even
times
higher.
the amount,
Yes.
times the amount, and 1,000, and they lost 1,000 more tanks. So
Typical
it
Soviets.
works, I guess. It works. They won the war. So
Citation: the Afghan-Soviet War. So basically, yes, the Kursk salient, which is not fun for the Germans, and yeah, I mean, it could have gone better for the Russians, but they defended it, and not only is the Kursk, not only is Operation Citadel, or Operation Citadel, whichever you want to say, which is the title of this brilliant plan that the Germans have never used before, a complete failure. They also decide that Operation Citadel is also the perfect time to roll out a bunch of experimental or brand new tanks. This is some of the first time that the Tiger tank, the oh so famous and definitely indestructible Tiger tank, which can kill
that is
3
used
Shermans,
incredibly historically accurately.
yes,
in media.
which takes 5 Shermans to destroy and is completely impenetrable from the front.
Mm-hmm.
Is
also a massive gas hog, which
Yes.
the Germans were completely lacking in.
Not only is that the first time this has been rolled out, but this is also the first time that the Ferdinand, aka
The greatest tank of the war.
yes, the greatest tank destroyer of all time with no possible downsides
Or flaws.
not at all.
The engineers were just that.
Yeah, they were just that smart.
Yeah.
This is also about the time that the Panther tank comes into action, and the Germans are extremely enthusiastic to use this perfect Ubermensch of a medium tank, which is completely flawless and can't break down, and can go more than 150 miles without the final drive breaking.
With flawless transmission.
Exactly, perfect transmission function. So yes. Not only are they completely destroyed at the Battle of Kursk, they not only are the actual tank casualties that were shot by the Russians bad, the tank casualties that were lost because their engines caught on fire, or they just ran out of gas, or their final drives broke, is pretty substantial. They lost somewhere around the number of 20 Ferdinands at the Battle of Kursk, just from their engines giving out, going up a slight hill.
Yeah, and the Soviets here, they were actually more innovative. I'm not British. I can't pronounce words like that.
British.
But basically, they actually provided some tactics that weren't even used before, like what I like to call the Pillbox Strategy, where basically what they did, they got a ton of T-34s that they were mass producing at this point. That's like massive output.
Losing a few hundred T-34, actually a few thousand T-34s, isn't that bad for the Russians?
Yeah, and they were just pumping them out. And basically what they did, when the German attack was actually ramping up, basically they just dug these holes and put the T-34s in, because they realized the T-34s could not stand a chance against the Tigers, right? Like their armor was too thin, it wasn't strong enough, and the mobility, they were more mobile than the Tiger, but they definitely couldn't dodge it all the time. So basically what they did is they just buried the tanks pretty much the entire hull and body of the tank under dirt and in a hole in a pillbox, kind of like, a stationary
Gun
anti-tank gun, basically. Yeah. A massive, basically it was a tank turret submerged in dirt, and basically it was much harder to destroy, obviously, because it was almost fully submerged, and it basically provided it was actually really effective, and it provided very good fire support for both Russian infantry and also against German armor. It was pretty effective. So it was, I think it was it was good for the it was good for the Soviets to use that tactic.
No, yeah, exactly. And you'll see this quite a lot. The Germans actually use this tactic a little bit later in the war, and you'll see that happen quite a lot. You'll see the Russians use this sort of weird kind of out there tactic in one battle, and then a few months later, like, the Germans are also using this, or at least using a similar tactic to this, in a whole lot of different areas.
Mm-hmm. And I think a theme you'll notice is that when the Germans high command specifically, not just the Germans in general, but when the German high command finds a tactic that they like, they
kind of just use it all the time and don't use anything different.
Yeah, and they don't really know that different things apply to different situations.
Especially when it comes to different terrain, which they are not very good at adapting to.
And to be fair, the Russian terrain isn't really that different, but when they were getting out of Russia and more into Eastern Europe and even Central Europe in 44 and 45, they were very they couldn't adapt. They couldn't adapt.
Exactly.
Yeah,
they couldn't adapt to their own terrain. And this also loops back into the reconnaissance discussion. German reconnaissance, of course, at this point in the war, was not doing too well. It was heavily compromised, and reconnaissance at this point was becoming more horses with dudes with binoculars on it than fast-moving armored cars, which is optimal. So this led to a lot of problems. They didn't have very good terrain reconnaissance, which is essential when it comes to fighting a battle or coming up with a tactic. And, and they didn't know a whole lot going into a battle, which of course is important,
especially when you're fighting on an offensive ground.
Especially when you're fighting on enemy territory, which they definitely know about. Exactly.
And that's what they were doing for most of the war until after Kursk, basically.
So basically, Kursk becomes what is basically the turning point of the war. It is the point in which the Russians sort of get their shit together, and they learn, and they start actually learning from the Germans and the tactics that they use, and the various other sort of errors that they are making in their plans as of now. And the Russians begin to slowly realize and slowly develop a plan that is extremely essential to winning the war, and that is Operation Bagration, which is it's definitely one of the most effective offensives of the war. It is, while yes, the tactics used during it are kind of, one might say, barbaric, they are extremely effective. It is constant advancing, and as soon as Operation Bagration comes into place, it becomes a trend for the Germans to be losing kilometers of land in a day.
And that trend only worsens as the war goes on, especially in 44 and 45.
Exactly. So yes, that's basically all the essentials that needs to be known about Kursk. It's a turning point. It's the point at which the Russians learned from the Germans and started adapting their tactics to better counter them in battle, and they finally come to terms with the actual offensive tactics that they are going to be using during the war. And that sort of concludes the podcast for this week.
Yeah, so it kind of it's definitely a lot shorter, at least I think.
Yes.
Than the other podcast, but again,
it was a continuation, and
I think we're going to be continuing this whole thing until
we finish it.
Until we get to the Berlin, which will be a very interesting episode that you should tune into, and that will probably be in like maybe 1-2 parts, maybe. We don't know. We're kind of planning as we go along, but yeah, that was basically it. Base, do you have any other things?
Make sure to put suggestions in the comments, and make sure to rate this video 5 and like and comment.
Also remember to submit questions for our Q&A. See ya.